The house felt wrong the moment I stepped through the front door. Not wrong in any obvious way, nothing broken, nothing missing, nothing out of place. But after 15 years of marriage, you develop a sixth sense about these things. The air itself seemed different, charged with the kind of tension that comes after secrets have been whispered in corners. I dropped my conference bag by the stairs and called out, "Cambria? I'm home early." Silence answered back. Her car wasn't in the driveway, but that didn't mean anything. She could be at the store, at work, at her sister's place. Normal Tuesday afternoon activities for a normal Tuesday afternoon, except nothing felt normal. I loosened my tie and headed for the kitchen, already mentally cataloging the small details that had triggered my unease. The coffee maker was spotless, unusual for Cambria, who typically left it with yesterday's grounds until I cleaned it. The mail was sorted and stacked neatly on the counter, bills separated from catalogs with military precision. Even the throw pillows on the living room couch were arranged with hotel room perfection. Cambria had cleaned. Really cleaned. The kind of deep, guilty cleaning that happens when someone's trying to erase evidence of something. Her phone buzzed on the granite countertop, the screen lighting up with an incoming text. Without thinking, I glanced at it. Old married couple habits die hard. The message preview showed just enough to make my stomach drop. Can't wait for tonight. Same place? D. As in Darren. As in my best friend since college, my best man, the guy who'd helped me move into this house, who came over every Sunday to watch football and complain about his latest failed relationship. I stared at the phone for a long moment, waiting for some innocent explanation to present itself. Maybe they were planning a surprise party. Maybe Darren needed relationship advice and Cambria was helping out. Maybe there was some perfectly reasonable explanation for why my wife and my best friend were making secret plans. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Darren. "Tell me you're wearing the blue dress." My hands started shaking. Not from anger. Not yet. From the sudden, terrible certainty that my life was about to change forever. I'd been a project manager for 12 years, trained to spot problems before they became disasters. This wasn't a problem anymore. This was a full-scale catastrophe, and I was standing in the middle of it. I picked up Cambria's phone and scrolled through her recent messages. What I found there made my chest tight with something that wasn't quite rage and wasn't quite grief. It was worse. It was the hollow feeling of being made a fool. The messages went back months. Intimate conversations, shared jokes, plans for secret meetings. My wife and my best friend conducting their affair with all the subtlety of teenagers passing notes in study hall. They'd been careful enough not to use explicit language, but the subtext was clear as daylight. "Wes is at that conference until Thursday," read one message from Cambria. "We could have the whole evening." "Perfect," Darren had replied. "I've been thinking about you all week." I scrolled further back, watching their relationship evolve from friendly texts to something else entirely. The transition had been gradual. A compliment here, a shared secret there, slowly building into something that made my 15-year marriage look like a sham. The front door opened with a jingle of keys. I quickly placed Cambria's phone back where I'd found it and moved to the refrigerator, pretending to examine its contents with the intensity of a food critic. "Wes." Cambria's voice carried that particular note of surprise that people use when they've been caught off guard. "You're home early. I thought your conference ran until tomorrow." I turned around, studying my wife's face with new eyes. She was still beautiful at 35, still the ambitious HR manager who'd caught my attention at a company mixer all those years ago. But now I could see the signs I'd been missing, the way her gaze didn't quite meet mine, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the careful distance she maintained as she set down her purse. "Session got canceled," I said, keeping my voice level. "Figured I'd surprise you." "That's wonderful," she said, but her smile looked painted on. "I was just running errands. You know how it is." I nodded, playing the part of the oblivious husband. Where's Darren been lately? Haven't seen him around for Sunday football in weeks. Something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or fear. I wouldn't know. You know I don't keep track of your friends' schedules. Liar. I wanted to throw the word at her, wanted to grab her phone and shove those messages in her face, wanted to demand explanations and apologies and promises that things would go back to the way they were before. Instead, I smiled and kissed her cheek, tasting the lie on her lips. I'm going to grab a shower, I said. Wash off the conference smell. Good idea, she said, already reaching for her phone. I'll start dinner. I headed upstairs, my mind racing with possibilities and plans. In the bathroom, I turned on the shower and sat on the edge of the tub, trying to process what I'd learned. My marriage was over. That much was clear. The question now was what I intended to do about it. I could confront them directly, demand explanations, try to salvage something from the wreckage. I could file for divorce, split our assets, move on with my life like a civilized adult. I could pretend I'd never seen those messages, live in denial until the truth became impossible to ignore. Or I could do something else entirely. From downstairs, I heard the soft murmur of Cambria's voice as she made a phone call, probably to Darren, warning him that I was home early, adjusting their plans accordingly. The casual efficiency of it made something cold settle in my chest. I'd spent my entire career managing complex projects, coordinating teams, solving problems that seemed impossible until you broke them down into manageable pieces. This situation was just another project, albeit a deeply personal one, and like any good project manager, I was going to need more information before I could develop an effective strategy. The next morning, Cambria left for work with a kiss on my cheek and a promise to pick up groceries on her way home. I waited until her car disappeared around the corner, then headed straight for our shared home office. If there's one advantage to being married to someone in HR, it's that they're paranoid about digital security. Cambria had insisted we set up cloud backups for everything: photos, documents, even our text messages and location data. What if our phones get stolen? She'd argued. We need to protect our information. Ironic, considering how that protection was about to work against her. I opened our shared cloud account and started digging. What I found there was a masterclass in deception, documented with the thoroughness of a federal investigation. Every rideshare receipt, every hotel key card purchase, every suspicious charge on our joint credit card, it was all there, backed up automatically and organized by date. The pattern became clear quickly. Every time I'd been out of town for work, Cambria had been busy. Hotel charges that didn't match her claimed whereabouts. Ride-share trips to Darren's apartment complex. Restaurant bills for two at places she'd never mentioned visiting. I pulled up our photo backup next, scrolling through months of images. Most were innocent. Family gatherings, work events, random snapshots of daily life. But buried among them were photos that told a different story. Cambria and Darren at restaurants I'd never been to, looking comfortable and intimate in a way that went far beyond friendship. Selfies taken in locations that didn't match the stories she'd told me about her evenings. The most damning evidence came from our location tracking. Cambria's phone had been dutifully recording her movements, creating a detailed map of her deception. While she'd claimed to be working late or visiting her sister, her actual location had been Darren's apartment building. The timestamps lined up perfectly with my business trips. I spent 3 hours compiling everything into a comprehensive timeline. As a project manager, I'd learned the importance of documentation. Every claim needed supporting evidence, every conclusion needed to be backed up with facts. By the time I finished, I had enough material to prove their affair beyond any reasonable doubt, but proof wasn't enough. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. I drove across town to Mickey's construction site. Mickey Brennan had been my friend since high school, a straight-talking carpenter who'd never liked Cambria and had never bothered to hide it. If anyone would give me honest advice about my situation, it would be Mickey. I found him installing kitchen cabinets in a half-finished house, his tool belt hanging at the familiar angle that meant he was in full work mode. He looked up when I walked in, immediately reading something in my expression. "You look like someone who just found out his lottery ticket was a fake," he said, setting down his drill. "What's eating you?" I gave him the abbreviated version. Cambria, Darren, the messages, the evidence. Mickey listened without interruption, his face growing darker with each detail. "Son of a gun," he said when I finished. "I never trusted that slick piece of work, but I didn't think he'd stab you in the back like this. And Cambria," he shook his head. "I always said she was too ambitious for her own good." "The question is what I do about it," I said. Mickey leaned against the kitchen counter, considering. "You could lawyer up, take her for everything she's worth. Adultery still matters in divorce court, especially when you've got this much evidence." "That's one option." "Or," Mickey said, a slow grin spreading across his face, "you could make them famous. Nothing hurts people like Cambria and Darren more than public embarrassment. They're all about image, right? Status? What if that status suddenly became toxic?" I thought about that as I drove home. Mickey was right about one thing. Cambria and Darren were both obsessed with their public personas. Cambria had built her career on being the polished, professional HR manager who had everything under control. Darren had spent years cultivating his image as the successful entrepreneur, the guy who'd made it big through charm and business savvy. What would happen to those carefully constructed images if the truth came out in the most public way possible? Back home, I started making phone calls. First to the private investigator that my lawyer had recommended during a property dispute 2 years ago. Then to a few contacts in the local business community, people who knew Darren professionally and might be interested in some uncomfortable truths about his character. The private investigator, a soft-spoken woman named Janet Morse, agreed to meet me that evening at a coffee shop downtown. I brought copies of my evidence, watching her face as she reviewed the timeline I'd constructed. "This is solid work," she said, tapping the printed pages. "You've got enough here to prove adultery in any court, but you mentioned wanting something beyond a standard divorce proceeding?" "I want to know everything," I said. "Not just about the affair, about both of them. Their finances, their business dealings, their other relationships. If there are skeletons in their closets, I want to know where the bones are buried." Janet nodded slowly. "That kind of investigation takes time and costs money. Are you sure you want to go down this road? Sometimes it's better to just cut your losses and move on." "I'm sure." She quoted me a price that made me wince, but I agreed to it. Some things are worth the investment. Over the next week, I maintained the pretense of normalcy. I went to work, came home, made conversation with Cambria about mundane topics. I even had dinner with Darren, sitting across from him at our usual restaurant while he told jokes and asked about my latest projects, playing the role of loyal friend with Academy Award-worthy conviction. The hardest part wasn't the anger. Anger was clean, simple, energizing. The hardest part was the loneliness. I was surrounded by people who were lying to me, people I'd trusted completely, and I couldn't confide in anyone except Mickey and Janet. I felt like an actor in a play where everyone else knew the script except me. But gradually, the pieces started coming together. Janet's investigation turned up information that went far beyond simple adultery. Darren's business, it turned out, was built on shakier foundations than anyone realized. His successful consulting firm was hemorrhaging money, kept afloat by a series of increasingly desperate loans and credit arrangements. He'd been using his relationship with Cambria to get inside information about her company's hiring plans, then positioning himself to win consulting contracts based on that privileged knowledge. Even more interesting was what Janet discovered about their social circle. Darren had a history of affairs with married women, always targeting the wives of men he considered beneath him intellectually or socially. Cambria wasn't his first conquest, she was just his latest. "The pattern is always the same," Janet explained during one of our coffee shop meetings. "He identifies a target, usually someone married to a man he perceives as competition. He slowly builds a relationship, makes the woman feel special and understood, then uses the affair to damage both the marriage and the husband's reputation. It's like psychological warfare disguised as romance. And Cambria? She knows exactly what she's doing. Her phone records show she's been in contact with his previous targets, comparing notes about their husband's weaknesses. This isn't just an affair. It's a coordinated campaign to destroy your reputation and your financial security. I stared at the evidence Janet had compiled, feeling something cold and purposeful settle in my chest. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about two people who had decided to treat my life like a game, my trust like a weapon to be used against me. Well, games have rules, and winners, and losers. It was time to start playing by my own rules. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox that changed everything. Thick, cream-colored paper with elegant calligraphy addressing it to Mr. Wesley Farrow. No mention of Cambria, no Mr. and Mrs., just me, alone. Inside was a wedding invitation that made my hands shake with something between rage and disbelief. Darren Michael Lyle and Cambria Elizabeth Farrow request the pleasure of your company at their wedding ceremony. I read it 3 times before the full audacity of it sank in. They were inviting me to their wedding. My wife and my best friend were getting married, and they wanted me there to witness it. The ceremony was scheduled for the following Saturday at the Riverside Event Center, the same venue where Cambria and I had celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary, the same place where Darren had given a toast about the importance of loyalty and friendship. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the invitation, trying to process the sheer brazenness of what they were doing. They hadn't even bothered to divorce me first. Cambria was planning to commit bigamy, apparently confident that I was too weak or too stupid to do anything about it. My phone rang. Darren's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, buddy," he said, when I answered, his voice carrying that familiar note of false cheer. "Did you get our invitation?" "I got it. I know this might seem sudden, but when you know, right? Cambria and I, we just clicked. It was like lightning striking. I hope you can be happy for us." "Lightning," I repeated. That's one way to describe it. "Look, I know this is awkward. I mean, you and Cambria had your run, but let's be honest. You two were never really compatible. She needs someone who can match her ambition, someone who understands her drive. No offense." "None taken." "So, you'll come? It would mean a lot to both of us to have you there. You're like a brother to me, Wes. That doesn't change just because circumstances have changed." I almost laughed. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. He was asking me to attend his wedding to my wife while simultaneously explaining why I wasn't good enough for her. It was like being stabbed and then asked to applaud the technique. "I'll be there," I said. "Really? That's great, man. I was worried you might be bitter about this." "Why would I be bitter? You're right. When you know, you know." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my kitchen and started planning. They wanted me at their wedding? Fine, I'd be there. But I was going to bring some uninvited guests to the party. The truth, the evidence, and every dirty secret I'd uncovered about their relationship. I called Janet and asked her to expedite her final report. Then I called Mickey and asked if he wanted to help me with a special project. Finally, I called the Riverside Event Center and spoke to their event coordinator, a harried-sounding woman named Patricia, who seemed overwhelmed by Cambria's demands for perfection. "Mrs. Farrow has been very specific about her requirements," Patricia said diplomatically. "She wants everything to be absolutely perfect." "I understand completely," I said. "I'm calling because I'd like to help with the technical setup. I have experience with audio-visual equipment, and I know how important this day is to both of them." "Oh, that would be wonderful. We're having some issues with the projection system, and Mrs. Farrow insisted on having screens for the ceremony. Something about sharing photos of their relationship with the guests." "Perfect. I'd be happy to help with that. I could come by this week to test the equipment, Make sure everything runs smoothly. You're a lifesaver. Can you come by Thursday afternoon? Thursday gave me 3 days to prepare. 3 days to compile everything I'd learned into a presentation that would expose Darren and Cambria for exactly what they were. 3 days to plan the most spectacular wedding gift in the history of matrimony. I spent those 3 days working with the focused intensity of a man possessed. I organized the evidence chronologically, starting with the first suspicious text messages and building to the most recent proof of their deception. I included screenshots of their communications, copies of hotel receipts, photos from their secret dates, and a detailed timeline showing how their affair had developed while I was traveling for work. But the real masterpiece was the section Janet had helped me compile about Darren's pattern of affairs. I had names, dates, and details about his previous conquests, including several women who would likely be attending the wedding. I had financial records showing how he'd used inside information from Cambria to win consulting contracts. I had evidence of his business's precarious financial situation and the loans he'd taken out using false information. The presentation was 43 slides long. I titled it, Top Affairs of Cambria Pharaoh, a Comprehensive Review. On Thursday afternoon, I arrived at the Riverside Event Center with my laptop and a confident smile. Patricia met me at the entrance, looking relieved to see someone who actually seemed to know what they were doing. The projection system is in the main hall, she said, leading me through elegant corridors lined with wedding photos. Mrs. Pharaoh wants the screens positioned so that everyone can see them clearly during the ceremony. The setup was perfect for my purposes. 2 large screens flanked the altar area, positioned so that both the wedding party and the guests would have an unobstructed view. The projection system was professional grade, designed for corporate events and large presentations. I spent an hour testing the equipment, making sure my presentation would display correctly. The image quality was crystal clear, the sound system was powerful enough to reach every corner of the hall, and the remote control had enough range for me to operate it from anywhere in the room. "This looks perfect," Patricia said as I finished my tests. "Mrs. Pharaoh will be so pleased that everything is working properly." "I want this day to be unforgettable for everyone involved," I said. On Saturday morning, I dressed carefully in my best suit, the same one I'd worn to my own wedding 15 years ago. I arrived at the Riverside Event Center an hour before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, carrying my laptop and wearing the kind of confident smile that gets you past security without questions. Patricia was in full crisis mode, dealing with last-minute changes and demands from the bride. She barely glanced at me as I set up my equipment and loaded my presentation onto the projection system. "Thank goodness you're here," she said, rushing past with an armload of flowers. "Mrs. Pharaoh changed her mind about the music 3 times this morning, and the photographer is running late, and the caterer is having issues with the appetizers." "Don't worry about the technical side," I said. "I've got everything under control." Guests began arriving as I made my final preparations. I recognized most of them: colleagues from Cambria's office, friends from our social circle, family members who had no idea what they were about to witness. They took their seats with the usual wedding ceremony chatter, admiring the decorations and speculating about the speed of the engagement. Darren appeared at the altar in a rented tuxedo, looking nervous but confident. He spotted me in the crowd and gave me a thumbs up, apparently still amazed that I was actually there to support his marriage to my wife. The music started. The wedding party began their procession down the aisle, and I stood at the back of the hall with the presentation remote in my hand, watching my wife prepare to walk down the aisle in a white dress that cost more than most people's cars. The moment had arrived. Time to give the happy couple a wedding gift they would never forget. The wedding march began, and Cambria appeared at the back of the hall in a flowing white gown that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She looked radiant, confident, every inch the blushing bride about to embark on her new life with the man of her dreams. I waited until she was halfway down the aisle, all eyes focused on her graceful progress toward the altar. Then I pressed the button on the remote control. The screens flanking the altar blazed to life with my presentation title, Top Affairs of Cambria Pharaoh, a Comprehensive Review. The effect was immediate and devastating. Cambria stopped walking as if she'd hit an invisible wall. Her face went from radiant to pale in the space of a heartbeat. Guests began murmuring, turning to look at the screens with confusion and growing alarm. Darren, standing at the altar, looked like a man who'd just watched his entire world collapse. His mouth opened and closed silently, no words coming out. I advanced to the next slide, a photo of Cambria and Darren kissing in the parking lot of the Marriott downtown, timestamp clearly visible in the corner. The date was 3 months ago, while I'd been in Chicago for a conference. The murmuring from the guests grew louder. Someone gasped. I heard Patricia, the event coordinator, whisper, "Oh my God," from somewhere behind me. I clicked again. The next slide showed a timeline of their affair, with text messages displayed in chronological order. The intimate conversations, the secret meetings, the casual way they'd discussed my travel schedule to coordinate their rendezvous. Cambria dropped her bouquet and started rushing toward the altar, her white dress billowing behind her like the sail of a sinking ship. "Stop this," she hissed, loud enough for the first few rows to hear. "Stop this right now." I advanced to the next slide. Hotel receipts. Dozens of them, showing charges to our joint credit card for rooms I'd never stayed in, meals I'd never eaten, champagne I'd never tasted. Each receipt was annotated with the corresponding text messages between Cambria and Darren, planning their romantic getaways. "Wes!" Darren finally found his voice, stepping down from the altar. "What are you doing? This is insane!" I smiled and clicked to the next slide. A photo of Darren with another woman taken 2 years ago. The woman was Jennifer Morrison, wife of Tom Morrison from our old neighborhood. The timestamp showed this photo was taken during Tom and Jennifer's marriage, just like my situation. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the hall's sound system, "I'd like to share some information about the happy couple that I think you'll find illuminating." The next slide showed Darren's pattern of affairs, documented with the thoroughness of a federal investigation. Names, dates, photos, text messages, a comprehensive catalog of his serial adultery spanning 5 years. Several women in the audience gasped as they recognized themselves or their friends in the evidence. Cambria reached the front of the hall and lunged for the projection equipment, but Mickey stepped into her path. I'd asked him to attend as my guest, and he was clearly enjoying his role as my unofficial security detail. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Mickey said calmly. "Destruction of property is a misdemeanor in this state." I clicked again. This slide showed financial records, how Darren had used information from Cambria about her company's hiring plans to position his consulting firm for lucrative contracts. It was a clear conflict of interest, possibly rising to the level of corporate espionage. "This is harassment," Cambria shouted, her composure completely shattered. "Someone call the police." "Actually," I said, "everything I'm showing here was obtained legally from our shared cloud storage account and public records. As my wife, you agreed to share this information when you signed our joint account agreements." The next slide was a bombshell, evidence that Cambria had been feeding information about her colleagues' personal lives to Darren, who had used it to manipulate business relationships and gain competitive advantages. Names, salaries, personal problems, family situations, all of it cataloged and weaponized. Several people in the audience were taking photos with their phones now. I could see the viral potential building in real time. By tonight, this presentation would be circulating through every social media platform in the city. "You're destroying everything!" Darren shouted, his face red with rage and embarrassment. "Years of work, years of building relationships." "Built on lies," I said, clicking to the next slide. "Built on betrayal and manipulation and the assumption that everyone else is too stupid to figure out what you're really doing." This slide showed text messages between Cambria and several of her female friends, discussing their husbands' weaknesses and how to exploit them. The casual cruelty of their conversations was breathtaking. They talked about their marriages like military campaigns, identifying vulnerabilities and planning attacks. The officiant, a nervous-looking minister who clearly hadn't signed up for this level of drama, cleared his throat. Perhaps we should postpone the ceremony until this situation can be resolved. There's not going to be a ceremony, I said, clicking to my final slide, because the bride is already married, to me, has been for 15 years. This whole wedding is a sham, just like everything else about their relationship. The final slide was simple. A copy of my marriage certificate to Cambria, still valid, still legal, making her attempted marriage to Darren an act of bigamy. The silence that followed was deafening. 200 guests sat in stunned silence, processing what they'd just witnessed. Phones continued to click and flash as people documented the scene. I could practically hear the social media posts being composed in real time. Cambria stood at the altar in her white dress, tears of rage streaming down her face, looking like a woman who'd just watched her entire life implode in front of an audience. Darren stood beside her, his tuxedo rumpled, his carefully styled hair disheveled, staring at the screens as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. I walked calmly to the front of the hall and retrieved my laptop from the projection system. The screens went dark, but the damage was done. The evidence was out there now, circulating through the crowd like a virus, spreading beyond this room into the wider world where reputations are made and destroyed. "Thank you all for coming," I said to the stunned audience. "I hope you found this as educational as I have. The bar is still open, and I believe the caterer has prepared an excellent selection of appetizers. Please, enjoy the reception." I walked out of the Riverside Event Center with my head held high, leaving behind the wreckage of two carefully constructed lives and the smoking ruins of their social standing. Behind me, I could hear the chaos beginning. Raised voices, accusations, the sound of people demanding explanations that would never be satisfactory. My phone was already buzzing with notifications. The presentation was going viral, just as I'd expected. By morning, everyone in our social and professional circles would know exactly what kind of people Cambria and Darren really were. The revenge was complete. But somehow, I didn't feel finished yet. The viral explosion happened faster than I'd anticipated. By Sunday morning, clips from the wedding presentation were trending on 3 different social media platforms. Someone had live-streamed the entire event, and the video had been shared thousands of times with hashtags like wedding fail and cheater exposed. I spent the morning in my kitchen, drinking coffee and watching my phone buzz with notifications. Text messages from friends and colleagues, missed calls from reporters, friend requests from strangers who wanted front-row seats to the drama. The presentation had taken on a life of its own, spreading far beyond our small social circle into the wider internet where public shaming becomes entertainment. Cambria's car wasn't in the driveway. She hadn't come home after the wedding debacle, which was probably wise. I wasn't sure what I would have said to her if she'd tried to walk through that front door as if nothing had happened. Around noon, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another reporter looking for a statement about my wedding revenge. But something made me pick up. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Darren's voice was thick with rage and something that might have been alcohol. "You think you've won something here?" "I think I've told the truth," I said calmly. "Everything in that presentation was factual. If you have a problem with the facts, maybe you should have considered that before you decided to betray 15 years of friendship. You've destroyed everything. My business, my reputation, my relationships, everything I've worked for. You destroyed those things yourself. I just documented it." "This isn't over," he said. "You think you can humiliate me in front of half the city and just walk away? You think there won't be consequences?" "Are you threatening me, Darren?" The line went quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was calmer but somehow more menacing. "I'm promising you, this isn't over." He hung up, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering what exactly he meant by consequences. Darren had always been the type to hold grudges, but he'd also always been more of a manipulator than a direct confrontation kind of guy. Whatever he was planning, it would probably be subtle, calculated, designed to cause maximum damage while keeping his own hands clean. I didn't have to wait long to find out. On Monday morning, I arrived at work to find my boss, Jim Patterson, waiting in my office with a grim expression. Jim was a fair man, someone I'd worked with for 8 years without any significant conflicts. Seeing him look this uncomfortable was never a good sign. "Wes, we need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. "I've been getting some calls about you, about this weekend. The wedding. The presentation you gave at the wedding. Some of our clients saw the video online. They're concerned about having someone with your recent public profile managing their projects." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What exactly are you saying, Jim?" "I'm saying we might need to consider moving you to a less client-facing role for a while, just until this whole situation calms down and people move on to the next viral video." "You're demoting me because I exposed my wife's affair?" "I'm trying to protect you," Jim said, but his tone suggested he was really trying to protect the company. "Some of the clients are worried about the intensity of your response. They're questioning your judgment, your stability. If we can just keep you out of the spotlight for a few months—" "Who called you?" I interrupted. "Which client specifically?" Jim hesitated, and I knew I had my answer before he spoke. "Darren Lyle called this morning. He's been talking to some of his contacts in the industry, expressing concerns about your mental state. He's suggesting that your behavior this weekend indicates some kind of breakdown, that you might not be reliable for major project management." The audacity of it was breathtaking. Darren was using his professional network to sabotage my career, painting me as unstable while positioning himself as the concerned friend trying to protect potential clients from my supposed instability. "Jim, you know me. You've worked with me for 8 years. Have I ever given you reason to question my judgment or my professionalism?" "No, of course not. But this situation is unprecedented. The video has over 1 million views, Wes. Our clients are nervous about being associated with that kind of publicity." I could see the writing on the wall. Darren had gotten to them first, spinning the narrative in his favor, making me look like the unstable ex-husband rather than the wronged party. He was using my own revenge against me, turning my moment of triumph into a professional liability. "I need some time to think about this," I said. "Take all the time you need. But Wes, maybe consider taking a vacation. Let things cool down. This will all blow over eventually." After Jim left, I sat in my office staring at my computer screen and realizing that Darren was better at this game than I'd given him credit for. He'd absorbed the hit from my presentation and immediately launched a counterattack, using his business connections to isolate me professionally while I was still celebrating my victory. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Told you this wasn't over. D." I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling my anger crystallize into something harder and more focused. Darren wanted to escalate this beyond the wedding humiliation? Fine. I'd been holding back, trying to maintain some semblance of civilized behavior, but if he wanted to play dirty, I had plenty more ammunition. I called Janet Morse, the private investigator. "I need everything you can find on Darren Lyle's business dealings," I said. "Every loan, every contract, every client relationship, and I need it fast." "That's going to be expensive," Janet warned. "Deep financial investigation takes time and resources. Money isn't an object. I want to know where every penny comes from and where it goes. I want to know which of his clients might be interested in learning about his history of manipulating business relationships through personal affairs. You're talking about destroying his livelihood. I'm talking about giving him exactly what he's trying to give me. Janet was quiet for a moment. This is getting serious, Wes. Are you sure you want to go down this road? Once you start targeting someone's business, they tend to respond in kind. He started targeting my business this morning. I'm just returning the favor. All right, give me a week. I hung up and started making my own calls. If Darren wanted to use his network against me, I could play that game too. I had 15 years of professional relationships, clients who trusted my work, colleagues who respected my judgment. It was time to start leveraging those relationships to tell my side of the story. The war between Darren and me was just beginning, and I intended to win. Janet's investigation into Darren's business dealings yielded results that exceeded even my expectations. Within a week, I had a comprehensive picture of his financial house of cards, and it was even more precarious than I'd imagined. Darren's consulting firm was essentially a shell game, moving money between accounts to create the illusion of success while operating on borrowed time and borrowed funds. He'd taken out multiple loans using inflated revenue projections, some of which bordered on fraud. More importantly, several of his major clients had no idea about his history of using personal relationships to gather competitive intelligence. I spent 2 days crafting a detailed report, documenting how Darren had used information gathered through affairs to win contracts and manipulate business relationships. Then I began making strategic phone calls to the right people, his clients, his lenders, his professional contacts who might be interested in knowing exactly who they were doing business with. The response was swift and devastating. By Thursday, 3 of his major clients had terminated their contracts. By Friday, his primary lender was demanding immediate repayment of his outstanding loans. By the following Monday, word was circulating through the business community that Darren Lyle was not someone you could trust with sensitive information. I was in my office reviewing project timelines and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy when my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. "You destroyed my business." Darren's voice was barely controlled rage. 5 years of work, gone. My reputation, my client relationships, everything. Funny how that works, I said. Almost like actions have consequences. Meet me tonight. The old warehouse district, Building 47. We're going to settle this once and for all. Are you challenging me to a fight, Darren? That seems a bit dramatic even for you. I'm giving you a chance to explain yourself face to face, without lawyers, without presentations, without hiding behind your computer screen. Just you and me, talking like men. Something in his tone made me pause. This wasn't the calculated manipulation I'd come to expect from Darren. This was desperation, the sound of a man who'd lost everything and was looking for someone to blame. Fine, I said. 8 o'clock. Building 47 was an abandoned electronics factory in the industrial district, the kind of place where bad decisions go to become worse decisions. I arrived early, parking across the street and watching the building for signs of movement. Darren's Tesla was already there, parked near the loading dock with its hazard lights blinking. I found him inside the main warehouse space, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. He looked terrible. Unshaven, rumpled clothes, the kind of disheveled appearance that comes from not sleeping for days. His usual polished facade had cracked completely, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. "You came," he said when he saw me. "I wasn't sure you would. You said you wanted to talk, so talk." "Why?" The question came out like a plea. "Why did you have to destroy everything? We could have worked this out quietly, like civilized people. Divorce, asset division, everyone moves on with their lives. Instead, you turned it into a public execution." "You invited me to your wedding," I said. "To my wife. You thought I was such a pushover that I'd actually show up and smile and congratulate you on your new life together. Did you really think I was going to just roll over and accept that? I thought you'd be mature about it. I thought you'd understand that these things happen, that people grow apart, that sometimes relationships just run their course. Relationships run their course. Affairs are a choice. Betrayal is a choice. Humiliating me by inviting me to watch you marry my wife was a choice. Darren stopped pacing and turned to face me directly. You want to talk about choices? Let's talk about what you chose to do. You didn't just expose the affair. You destroyed my entire life. My business, my reputation, my future. You made it impossible for me to work in this city, maybe anywhere. Good. The simple brutality of my response seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his face cycling through expressions of shock, rage, and something that might have been despair. You're enjoying this, he said. You're actually enjoying watching me lose everything. I'm enjoying watching you face consequences for your actions. For the first time in your life, you can't charm your way out of the mess you created. You can't manipulate someone else into taking the blame. You have to own what you did. What I did? What about what Cambria did? She was just as involved in this as I was, but somehow she's not the one losing her career. She's not the one being blacklisted by every professional contact she's ever made. Cambria will get her turn, but right now, we're talking about you. Darren laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the warehouse walls. You know what the really funny thing is? I actually felt guilty about the affair. I kept telling myself I was going to end it, that I was going to confess everything and try to make things right. But Cambria convinced me that you were holding her back, that she deserved better than what you could give her. And you believed that? I wanted to believe it. It made what we were doing feel justified instead of just selfish. He ran his hands through his hair, leaving it even more disheveled. But you know what I realized this week, while I was watching my entire life collapse? She was using me just as much as I was using you. She wanted someone with money and status to upgrade to, and I was convenient. If I hadn't been available, she would have found someone else. Probably. So what happens now? You've destroyed my business, ruined my reputation, made it impossible for me to work in this industry. Are you satisfied? Is your revenge complete? I looked at him standing there in the empty warehouse, this man who'd been my best friend for 20 years, before he decided that my wife and my trust were things he could take without consequence. He looked broken, defeated, stripped of all the charm and confidence that had defined him for as long as I'd known him. Almost, I said. Before he could react, I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. I'd been recording our conversation since the moment I walked into the warehouse. What you just said about feeling guilty, about Cambria convincing you that I was holding her back, about her using you, that's going to make a very interesting addition to the public record, especially the part about how she was planning to upgrade to someone with more money and status. Darren's face went white. You can't use that. That was a private conversation. In a public place, with no expectation of privacy, perfectly legal to record. I pocketed the phone. This conversation is going to be very damaging to Cambria's reputation. Her friends, her colleagues, her family, they're all going to hear exactly what you think about her motives and her character. Please, he said, and the word came out broken. Haven't you done enough? We've both lost everything. Isn't that enough revenge for you? No, I said simply. It's not. I walked toward the warehouse exit, leaving Darren standing alone in the empty space. Behind me, I heard him call my name, but I didn't turn around. The conversation was over. The war was over. As I drove home through the dark streets, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not happiness exactly, but the quiet satisfaction of a job completed. Darren and Cambria had gambled with my life, my trust, and my future. They'd lost that gamble, and now they were paying the price. My phone buzzed with notifications as I pulled into my driveway. The recording of my conversation with Darren was already circulating online, adding another layer to the viral story that had started with the wedding presentation. By morning, everyone would know exactly what Cambria's lover really thought about her motives and her character. I sat in my car for a moment, looking at the house I'd shared with Cambria for 15 years. Tomorrow, I'd start the process of reclaiming my life, filing for divorce, rebuilding my professional reputation, moving forward without the weight of their betrayal.